Recently in the news, and in conversations amongst Californians, a lot of people have been talking about we might need to take over control of the borders. The federal government is now grabbing and confiscating ventilators. The leader of the federal government said that he had absolute power. Um, those sorts of activities, the person directing the federal government not interpreting the law correctly, acting like a king, uh, last week, and then seizing ventilators from California is scary. And that fear is causing people to think about how they have to make adjustments real quick. So, consider this a sort of unofficial part two to the top 10 things that California would need to do to become a nation instantly. You might consider this number 11. Now, I didn't include in the top 10 because it's not exactly legal. The first 10 things that I recommended were all legal and could be done right now. This is going into an area of legality that is uncertain. I am not recommending anybody does this, but a lot of people are talking about this, so I wanted to provide the key facts. So if California was going to cut off money to the federal government, aka federal income taxes are paid for by Californians that gets shipped to the federal government, if they could seize that money or stop that money from leaving California and keep it in California. Now, to my understanding, that's not legal. And I'm not saying they should do that. And in no way am I saying anybody should not pay their federal income taxes or file them. I'm simply saying, here's some key facts about a theoretical conversation. So, number one, let's go back to January 1st, 2017. In January 1st, 2017, Willie Brown went on CBS San Francisco and said that California could cut off funds to the federal government. So Willie Brown is the most powerful politician in California for decades. He also started Gavin Newsom's career. So when Willie Brown goes on TV January 1st, 2017 and says, hey, on CBS TV in San Francisco, which is Gavin Newsom's city that he started his political career in, by the guy that started his political career, and says California could be a net non-payer or cut off federal funds, Newsom knew what he was saying and watched it happen. So let's go forward to December 2017. So Willie Brown makes this comment about how they're going to cut off federal funds January 1st, 2017. In December 2017, 12 months later, the federal government says they're going to pass the Tax and Jobs Act. So that's the Tax and Jobs Act, also known as the tax reform. December 2017, one of Trump's big successes early on. Now, the key thing about that was it cut out what's known as SALT, state and local tax deductions. So in California, real estate property is very expensive. A lot of people are able to afford the taxes here in California because they can write off on their federal income taxes state and local tax deductions, namely for real estate. The Tax Reform Act by Trump in December 2017 wiped that out. So if you own a lot of property in California, you lost your main way of having your tax level reduced. That was the same year that Willie Brown said, maybe we don't pay federal income taxes at all. Yes, Trump and Willie Brown were talking to each other on behalf of the federal government and the California government. No one's going to admit that, but that's what was going on. Let's forward to January 10th. January 10th, 2019. Trump said that he would stop paying for wildfire aid. So January 10th, 2019, Donald Trump said that the federal government was going to cut off funds for wildfire assistance and crisis bailouts. Now, in response to that, there were many Californians who were not CalExit supporters who went on Twitter and said, stop paying federal income taxes. I want to repeat, January 10th, 2019, Trump says we're going to cut federal income. We're going to cut fire assistance. Californians who have nothing to do with the movement start saying, well, let's just not pay federal income taxes. I didn't say that. Many Californians said that around January 10th, 2019, in response to what Trump said. News articles covered this. It was kind of a big spectacle. Now, January 28th, 2019, that same month, same year, Governor Newsom is the first governor ever in American history to request that California be allowed to redirect federal income tax to the state. So, January 10th, Donald Trump says he's going to cut federal funds. Californians start talking about how they don't want to pay federal income tax at all. That same month, January 28th, 2019, Gavin Newsom is the first governor ever in American history to say, can we redirect federal income tax back to California? It's not a coincidence he said that the same month that Trump cut off funds, and Californians were talking about removing federal income tax. And it was a huge move for a governor to ask for the federal government to allow them to redirect federal income money to the state. Specifically, Newsom was talking about the single-payer healthcare system he wanted to implement in California and wanted to redirect Medicare income taxes. But get this, Newsom already asked, and is basically the only person in all 50 states to ever ask, can we redirect federal income tax here? So you have Willie Brown, the guy that started Newsom, saying, let's not pay federal income tax, or let's cut the funding and then send them what we feel is necessary. You have Trump arguing with him and Trump instituting a tax law that punishes Californians. Then you have Trump cutting funds to Californians in an emergency. And then Newsom says, hey, I'm formally asking you if we can redirect federal income tax revenue, meaning we have thought about how to do this in California. So January 28, 2019, Newsom launches his missile at the federal government saying, we're actually thinking about how redirecting federal income tax money. 2 years prior, January 1st, 2017, the guy who started Newsom's career in the city that Gavin Newsom got started politically says, let's not pay federal income tax. So there's a lot of thought there, and there's already some experimentation already done by Newsom. Let's go to August 1st, 2019. Now, Californians were talking about how to undo the removal of SALT from the federal tax law. And they were saying, well, maybe we can have Californians write off charitable deductions and we can get that back into the federal income system so that SALT can still exist, so that Californians can have their tax deductions written down on federal income tax. Well, August 1st, 2019, the federal government Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, said, you can't do that, California. You will not be able to get away with the fact that you no longer have the SALT ability. It is wiped out. There's nothing you can do for it. And any talk of Californians talking about how they were going to write off charitable deductions to somehow game the federal income tax system so that you can get your SALT deductions is not available, and it's gone. So this is the IRS saying specifically to Californians, we see what you're trying to do. You're not going to get out of it, and you're going to get stuck. Period. Over. Now let's go back to April 20th, 2019. So that's April 2020. So April 2020, about a year later, which is now. And Senator Sherrod Brown points out that Treasury Secretary of the federal government, Steve Mnuchin, knows the banks could take your $1,200. And a Treasury official was quoted in this article in the Daily Kos on April 15th, 2020, Daily Kos, in an article called Mnuchin Knows the Banks Could Take Your $1,200. A Treasury official was asked about this and said, nothing in the law precludes banks from going after the payments. So what Sherrod Brown's pointing out is that Trump and the federal government's talking about how they're going to give you an individual $1,200 to help with the stimulus. There's nothing that prevents banks from grabbing that money. So the federal government will issue the money to the banks. The banks will issue it to you. What stops the banks from saying, I'm going to hold on to it? Out of the kindness of their heart, they're supposed to make sure to forward that money onto you. Well, I would recall for you the 2008 global economic collapse and the $700 billion bailout of the banks, where every federal official said the only reason they're bailing out the banks is so the banks can give loans to the people. Banks never did that. It was not written in as a requirement for the bailout. Everybody said that's what's going to happen, and it never happened. So the federal government in 2008, 2010 gave banks a lot of money on the understanding they were going to give it to the people. The banks never did that, and they were never punished. And so here we are again. The federal government's going to give money to the banks to give to the people. That's what everyone's saying. But nothing in the law requires the banks to do that. So how do we know the banks now won't do the same thing they did a decade ago? Nobody got in trouble. Nobody was punished. They know they can get away with it. So, bottom line, if you are a wealthy Californian, you're screwed because your SALT deduction for federal income tax is gone. California tried to get around that. The IRS said no. If you are a regular person, not super wealthy, the federal government is giving your $1,200 to the banks. There's nothing in the law that says the banks can't seize that. Gavin Newsom, your current governor, is the first one to experiment and has thought about redirecting federal income tax. The person that started Gavin Newsom's career straight up said, let's redirect federal income tax. And I would like to point out that for 200 years, the idea that you as an individual pay federal income tax was not true. So the states would collect federal taxes and send it to the federal government. That used to be the way that it was for a very long time across America. The Fed said, hey, we need taxes. The people of California, you have to pay. Okay. But then the California government would grab those taxes and say, here's your taxes. So it's not like there's no legal basis for returning to that system. It was the system for a very long time. The 13th Amendment, the amendment passed in 1913, changed the law and said now Congress and the federal government has the ability to directly take taxes from individuals. Before 1913, that was not clear-cut law. So before 1913, that was not the understanding that you as an individual had to pay taxes directly to the federal government. I'm not saying don't pay taxes. Follow all the laws, be peaceful. These are facts to think about in a climate where Californians are examining different ideas every 24 hours. Information for you to think about.